the judge barked, his gavel slamming down like thunder. But before the echo even faded, he let out a slight, condescending smirk, aimed directly at the lone teenager standing at the defense table. The courtroom wasn't prepared for what it was seeing. There he stood, Elliot Chase, just 17 years old, barely taller than the podium, wearing a navy blue suit that hung awkwardly on his frame, the sleeves slightly too long, and a pair of worn-out sneakers peeking from beneath his dress pants. His tie was crooked, and his hands were shaking just a little, but his eyes, focused, unblinking, determined. A low murmur rippled through the room. Jurors leaned in. Journalists at the back checked their notes again, unsure if this was a prank. Even the bailiff raised an eyebrow. The judge peered over his glasses, eyebrows arched in mock disbelief. "Let me get this straight. You, young man, are here to represent the defense? On an official, real criminal trial?" Elliot straightened his back. "Yes, Your Honor. I've been granted authorization under the state's minor legal advocacy program to act as lead counsel. My client has signed consent, and my supervising attorney is present as required by statute." There was a pause, a long, weighted silence that felt like the courtroom was holding its breath. Then laughter. It started with one scoff from the prosecutor, then spread to a few jurors, and even the gallery. One woman covered her mouth to hide her giggle. Another man whispered, "Is this some kind of legal TikTok stunt?" The judge tried to maintain decorum, but couldn't help himself. "Son, this isn't some high school debate. This is Superior Court. You're wearing your dad's suit and standing where real lawyers stand. Don't embarrass yourself." Elliot felt the heat rise in his cheeks, but he didn't flinch. "I may not have the years," he said slowly, clearly, "but I have the facts, the law, and the truth. And sometimes, Your Honor, that's all that really matters." The courtroom quieted slightly. From the prosecution bench, Attorney Douglas Grant, a man with a reputation for ruthless cross-examinations, chuckled under his breath and leaned over to his assistant. "This will be fun. Let the kid burn out in 5 minutes." But Elliot stood firm, placing his legal binder down, opening it with care. The papers inside weren't doodles or Wikipedia printouts. They were handwritten notes, highlighted statutes, cross-referenced exhibits, and timelines meticulously prepared. What no one in the courtroom realized yet was that this boy, mocked, underestimated, and nearly laughed out of the room, was about to flip the entire trial upside down. They didn't know that Elliot had studied case law more thoroughly than half the lawyers in the room. They didn't know he had found evidence the police missed. And they certainly didn't know that within the next hour, they'd be on their feet, not mocking, but applauding. Because this wasn't just a boy in a suit. This was a legal genius in disguise. The boy's name? Elliot Chase. Just 17 years old. Elliot wasn't your average teenager. He wasn't the type to spend his evenings gaming or scrolling endlessly through TikTok trends. While his classmates worried about prom outfits and SAT scores, Elliot had his nose buried in law books. Not because someone forced him to, but because he was obsessed with justice. It all started when Elliot was just 13 years old. A local family in his town had lost their home due to a legal technicality, and no one around him could explain why. That incident stuck with him like a splinter in his brain. He watched how lawyers talked, how judges ruled, how the truth sometimes got buried under bureaucracy. That year, he picked up a worn copy of the U.S. Constitution from a second-hand bookstore, and he never looked back. By the time most kids were learning to drive, Elliot was deep into constitutional law. He understood the Fourth Amendment better than some first-year law students. His evenings were spent watching real trial footage instead of Netflix. He took online law courses, earned certifications, and even started writing blog posts that gained traction in the local legal community. At 15, he landed a rare internship at a mid-sized law firm in Philadelphia. It wasn't glamorous. He mostly organized files and fetched coffee, but he listened, learned, observed. Soon, the senior associates were asking him for help tracking down case citations. That's when his mentor entered the picture. Judge Alan Rowe, now retired, noticed the boy's sharp questions during a legal seminar for high schoolers. He invited Elliot to shadow him at court sessions. Over the next year, Rowe personally coached Elliot in trial strategy, ethical lawyering, and real-world courtroom dynamics. Then came a breakthrough. The state had recently passed a groundbreaking pilot program, the Minor Legal Advocacy Initiative, designed to give exceptionally gifted teens limited courtroom exposure under legal supervision. Elliot not only applied, he aced the entrance evaluation and passed a youth bar certification exam that tested knowledge on real case law, procedure, and argumentation. Only 3 students in the state had ever passed it. Elliot was one of them. But the case that would put him in the national spotlight, it wasn't part of any school project. It was personal. His elderly neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, was facing charges of property fraud, accused of forging documents to illegally claim land that supposedly didn't belong to him. The 72-year-old war veteran was known in the neighborhood as kind, quiet, and honest. But when a city developer pushed forward with accusations, claiming Jenkins had altered deed records to avoid land seizure, no one stood up to fight it. No one except Elliot. Every lawyer Mr. Jenkins approached wanted money. No one was willing to take on a complicated fraud case pro bono. Time was running out. Elliot, seeing a man he admired being torn down unjustly, made a decision that shocked even his mentor. "I'll take the case," he said. At first, Mr. Jenkins laughed. "Kid, you can't even vote yet." But Elliot wasn't joking. He studied every page of the property deed, cross-checked every city file, interviewed neighbors, pored over emails and documents the police had overlooked. And when he realized Mr. Jenkins was being framed by someone with a financial motive, he knew he had to act fast. With the backing of Judge Rowe, who personally submitted the request for special court permission, Elliot gained temporary courtroom rights to present the defense under legal supervision. The courtroom had never seen anything like it. A teenager in sneakers, standing up not for fame or recognition, but for justice. Elliot didn't need a degree to know what was right. All he needed was the law, the facts, and his unshakable belief in truth. And now, with the weight of a man's future on his shoulders, Elliot was ready to go to war in court. Not as a student, not as a child, but as a legal warrior in disguise. As the courtroom doors closed and the trial began, there was a shift in the atmosphere. An undercurrent of anticipation mixed with disbelief. No one quite knew what to expect. A teenage boy was about to take on one of the most seasoned prosecutors in the state. The prosecutor, Douglas Grant, was a towering figure in legal circles. With over 2 decades of courtroom experience, a perfect win streak on white-collar crime, and a reputation for intimidating even the most seasoned defense attorneys, he was confident. Too confident. He leaned toward Elliot, lips curled into a smirk, and whispered with a condescending chuckle, "Try not to cry when I bury your argument, kid." Elliot didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't respond. Instead, he adjusted his tie, took a breath, and waited. When his moment came, Elliot stood from the defense table and walked, slowly, deliberately, toward the center of the courtroom. His sneakers squeaked slightly on the polished floor, but his voice, it rang out clear, calm, and commanding. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, locking eyes with each juror. "You've been told this is an open and shut case, that the prosecution has irrefutable evidence. But I'm here to show you that everything you've been led to believe is built on incomplete data, false assumptions, and a deliberate rush to judgment." You could feel the temperature drop. Elliot turned to the projector and began presenting a meticulously structured timeline of events, something even the police had failed to fully map out. On the screen flashed security footage from a nearby convenience store. He had acquired it through a Freedom of Information request, filed himself. The footage showed Mr. Jenkins, his client, nowhere near the courthouse on the day the fraudulent documents were allegedly submitted. Then came the phone records. With laser-sharp articulation, Elliot pointed out that Mr. Jenkins was on a call with his doctor during the exact time the crime supposedly occurred, cross-verified with GPS ping data. The prosecution had missed it entirely. Elliot didn't stop there. He held up an envelope. "This," he said, "was buried in city records. A complaint letter filed 3 months before this case, written by my client, warning the city about errors in their property database. That letter mysteriously disappeared until now." Gasps. Murmurs. The courtroom began to shift. Grant, the prosecutor, stood abruptly. Objection, Your Honor. Irrelevant and speculative. The judge, who had earlier mocked Elliot's presence in the courtroom, looked over his glasses. On what grounds? Grant stammered. These materials weren't part of discovery. Elliot calmly turned to the judge. Your Honor, under Pennsylvania Rule of Criminal Procedure 573b. 1. Newly discovered exculpatory evidence is admissible if it directly contradicts the prosecution's claims. I'd like to cite Commonwealth v. Jordan, 2014. The courtroom froze. The judge's eyebrows raised slightly. Jordan, that's a Supreme Court ruling on withheld evidence. Elliot nodded. Exactly. And it ruled in favor of the defendant. A long pause. The judge tapped his pen. Motion allowed, he finally said, reluctantly, but with a tone that sounded suspiciously like respect. The prosecutor sat down slowly, his face suddenly less confident. Elliot walked back to his desk, pausing briefly to look at the jurors. Some of them leaned in closer now, listening, watching. From the back row, someone whispered under their breath, "Who is this kid?" That whisper echoed louder than any objection. In that moment, Elliot Chase wasn't just a teenager in a courtroom. He was commanding the room, dismantling years of legal experience with truth, logic, and preparation. And the courtroom, once filled with smirks and snickers, was now dead silent, because they all sensed it. Something extraordinary was unfolding right in front of them. The tension in the courtroom was already thick when Elliot Chase made his next move, a move that no one, not even the judge, saw coming. I'd like to request permission to cross-examine the city inspector who filed the original fraud complaint, Elliot stated clearly. There was a beat of silence. Then the courtroom buzzed again, low murmurs and raised eyebrows. The inspector, Leonard Briggs, was a long-standing government employee with over 25 years of service. His word was considered solid gold in city affairs. Judge Harris squinted. Is this relevant to the central charge, Mr. Chase? Elliot nodded with unwavering confidence. Yes, Your Honor. I believe this witness's testimony holds the key to establishing motive behind the accusation and, potentially, intentional misconduct. Grant, the prosecutor, objected. Your Honor, the defense is attempting to turn this into a conspiracy theory. But the judge, now visibly curious, overruled. Let's hear the boy out. Inspector Briggs took the stand, slightly annoyed but composed. He adjusted his tie, squared his shoulders, and looked at Elliot with a mix of confusion and contempt. Elliot stood, paper in hand, and paced slowly before speaking. Inspector Briggs, you filed the official report stating that Mr. Jenkins falsified deed documents, correct? Yes, Briggs replied curtly. And to your knowledge, were those documents ever forensically analyzed for tampering? Briggs paused. No, it wasn't deemed necessary. The registration irregularities were enough. Elliot circled in, voice calm but sharp. Right, but you were the one who flagged those irregularities. So my question is this. He turned, looked directly at the inspector. Is it true that you personally stood to gain a financial commission from the acquisition of Jenkins' property if it was seized by the city? The air was sucked from the room. Briggs blinked. I don't think that's relevant to the matter at hand. Elliot stepped closer. Respectfully, sir, it's entirely relevant. Please answer the question. Briggs shifted in his seat. It's a standard incentive structure for redevelopment liaisons. So yes, Elliot pressed, louder now. You would have received money if the city took Mr. Jenkins' land. Isn't that a conflict of interest? Briggs hesitated, too long. Yes, he finally muttered. The courtroom erupted. Audible gasps. Shocked expressions. One juror covered her mouth. A reporter's pen slipped from his hand. The prosecution looked like they had been blindsided by a freight train. Elliot continued, seizing the momentum. Your Honor, I submit that the accusation of fraud was built on a biased report from someone with a direct financial incentive to see Mr. Jenkins lose his land. That alone taints the entire foundation of the case. The judge didn't speak right away. He sat up straighter. His once dismissive expression was gone, replaced with something else, serious attention. He leaned forward on the bench, eyes locked on Elliot. Finally, he spoke. Young man, Where did you learn to litigate like this?" Elliot smiled, not smugly, but with quiet pride. "From the law, sir," he said, "and from a mentor who believed that truth doesn't care about age." There was something in the way he said it, unshakable, humble, and powerful. The judge looked at him for a long moment. Then he sat back, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The courtroom had changed. The tide had turned. What started as a mockery had become a masterclass. Elliot Chase had just unraveled the entire prosecution with logic, facts, and integrity. And everyone, even the judge who once mocked him, now saw what he truly was. Not a teenager pretending to be a lawyer, but a young legal prodigy who had just exposed the truth in front of the whole world. The jury took only 45 minutes. 45 minutes to weigh a mountain of evidence, expose a web of deceit, and recognize the undeniable brilliance of a teenager who had done what seasoned professionals failed to do. As the foreperson stood, the courtroom fell into a hush so deep you could hear the creak of a chair. Everyone leaned forward, breath held, waiting for the final word. Not guilty. The words rang through the courtroom like a bell of liberation. Gasps erupted from the audience. Applause broke out, first from the gallery, then the jury box. Even the stone-faced bailiff cracked a rare grin. Mr. Jenkins, seated at the defense table beside Elliot, covered his face in disbelief, tears escaping from the corners of his eyes. The judge, trying to maintain order, banged his gavel. But this time, there was no annoyance, just warmth. He looked at Elliot with a new expression, one the boy hadn't seen before. Respect. "Case dismissed," the judge said, his voice steady. Then, turning to Elliot, he added with a faint smile, "And Mr. Chase, you have a future brighter than this courtroom ceiling. Consider this your unofficial graduation." The moment was cinematic. As Elliot helped Mr. Jenkins to his feet, a flood of reporters surged forward. Microphones extended. Cameras flashed. Headlines were already being written. The courtroom doors opened to a crowd of curious onlookers who had gathered after hearing whispers of the boy lawyer flipping a real case on its head. His phone buzzed endlessly. Law schools offering early enrollment, news anchors requesting interviews, legal firms begging to mentor him. But Elliot, composed as always, kept his cool. When asked by one reporter if this case was just a publicity stunt, his response was swift and heartfelt. "I didn't do this for attention," he said. "I did it because no one else would. Mr. Jenkins deserved a voice. I just had the courage to raise mine." In a world obsessed with fame, Elliot's humility stood out. That one courtroom battle didn't just save a man's future, it sparked a movement. By the end of the week, his story had gone viral. TikTok edits, YouTube shorts, and documentary pitches flooded in. The hashtag teen attorney trended worldwide. People weren't just inspired, they were in awe. Within months, Elliot had become a symbol, not of rebellion, but of righteous defiance, a reminder that the system, no matter how rigid, could still be challenged by someone armed with nothing but truth, determination, and an iron will. He began speaking at high schools and youth centers, encouraging other teenagers to pursue justice. He launched a podcast called Raise Your Voice, where he broke down legal cases and taught young people how to understand their rights. He created a scholarship fund for kids interested in law who couldn't afford college. And yes, the legal world took notice. By 18, Elliot was working with nonprofit legal defense teams. By 19, he was leading seminars alongside former judges. And everywhere he went, people still referred to him by the title he had earned, not given: the teen attorney who shut down the system. As for the judge, months after the case, he sent a handwritten letter to Elliot. Inside was a formal invitation to return to the courtroom, not as a student, not as a defendant, but as a guest of honor. Elliot sat in the front row that day, beside dignitaries and legal giants. The judge stood before the court and declared, "Sometimes justice doesn't come with age. Sometimes it comes with courage." And in the back of the courtroom, Mr. Jenkins sat quietly, smiling, because justice had been served, not by the system, but by the boy who dared to challenge it.